I never expected the ranch to feel like a turning point. It started so simply, my stepfather, Mark, asking if I could accompany him to the property for a few days. His usual ranch hand, Cole, had come down with a nasty flu, and with Mom planning a trip to visit her friend in Jasper, the timing worked out. He needed help with the animals, someone to haul supplies and keep things running. I was on break from college, and honestly, I hadn't made any real plans. At first, it felt like just another quiet favor to help family. I said yes without a second thought. The drive out was long and winding, the sun dipping low behind pine-covered hills by the time we reached the ranch. Golden light painted everything in warm tones, and dust curled behind the tires like smoke. The place was a few hours outside of town, isolated and still, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. I hadn't been here in over a year, but everything looked the same. The barn with its slanted roof, the little creek behind the corral, the porch swing that creaked in the wind. Even the smell of it, sun-baked wood, hay, and the faint musk of animals, felt like stepping into a faded memory. It was just the two of us now. No Mom bustling around the kitchen, no Cole sauntering out of the barn with his slow, southern drawl. Just me and Mark. I wasn't close to him when he first married Mom. I was 16 then, and honestly, a little bitter about her moving on so quickly after the divorce. But he'd been kind, patient, quiet in a way that didn't ask much of me. We had slowly built something respectful, if not exactly warm. But that first evening at the ranch, something shifted. After we unpacked and settled in, he made dinner, nothing fancy, just grilled chicken, baked beans, and roasted corn, but it was the way he did it. Calm, thoughtful, like he remembered what I liked. We sat on the porch afterward, watching the sky go from lavender to indigo, fireflies blinking in the tall grass. "You okay being out here?" he asked, glancing at me over the rim of his beer bottle. "Yeah," I said, tucking my knees to my chest on the swing. "I kind of forgot how quiet it gets. It's nice." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, peaceful." And then came the silence, the kind that didn't feel awkward but full. Like there was more in the air than just the fading hum of insects. The next day, I started helping with the animals, feeding the goats, checking the chicken coop, even mucking out stalls. Mark showed me how to fix a sagging fence line, and when I dropped a wrench and let out a frustrated groan, he just laughed, shaking his head. "You're doing better than most of the guys I've hired," he said, tossing me a cold water bottle. "You're tough." Something about the way he said it stuck with me. Not just the words, but the way his eyes lingered for a half-second too long. I caught myself smiling later when I replayed it in my head. That night, I sat beside him on the porch again, closer than the night before. He didn't move away. Neither did I. By the third day, it started to feel like a routine. Coffee early, chores through the heat, lunch under the shade of the barn, then more work until the sky started to melt into orange and red. We talked more than usual. About small things at first, college, books, animals. But then, deeper things crept in. I told him how I felt stuck sometimes. How being 19 didn't feel like the freedom everyone promised. He told me about the early days of the ranch, before he met my mom. About his father. About feeling like he'd built a life no one really saw. It was strange. I saw him that way for the first time, not just as my stepfather or my mom's husband, but as a man. A man who worked hard, carried the weight of responsibility, and had this softness in his voice when he talked about things that mattered. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The lines around his eyes when he laughed. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was deep in thought. The quiet steadiness in the way he looked at me. Not sharp or assessing, but present. Intentional. That evening, as I stood on the porch brushing out my hair after a shower, I caught him watching me. Just for a moment. But it was enough. He looked away first. And I realized something had changed. Not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in a quiet unraveling. like a thread being pulled loose in the fabric of something I thought was stitched up tight. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. But that night, when I went to bed, I left the door to my room slightly ajar. By the fourth morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, wrapped in shadows, and the only sound was the creak of the old wood floor as I tiptoed through the hallway. I found Mark already outside, coffee in hand, leaning against the railing of the porch, staring at the horizon where dawn was just beginning to break. "You're up early," I said, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself. He turned, smiling softly. "Habit. Out here, the day starts with the sun. Couldn't sleep." I shrugged, joining him at the railing. "Not really. Too many thoughts." He handed me his mug without hesitation. I hesitated for just a second before taking it, our fingers brushing. His hand was warm, rough from years of work, and mine felt small in comparison. It wasn't anything. And yet it was. We stood there in silence, passing the mug back and forth, watching the sky bleed from lavender into gold. Over the next few days, the rhythm of the ranch sank deeper into me. The work was hard, but something about the way Mark trusted me with it, really trusted me, made me feel different. Capable. Seen. And he watched me. I felt it more than I saw it at first. Like when I bent down to fill a water trough and looked up to catch his gaze on me from across the yard. Or when I struggled to lift a heavy bag of feed, and he was there in a second, close, too close, guiding my hands, murmuring quietly, "Lift with your legs, not your back." His voice low, his hand steady at my elbow. Each touch was small, casual, but I noticed. One afternoon, the heat broke with a sudden storm. We were caught outside, moving hay bales when the rain started. Thunder cracked over the hills, and Mark grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the barn with a rushed "come on." We burst through the doors soaked, laughing breathlessly, our clothes clinging to our skin. I stood there in the barn, dripping and out of breath, watching him toss his head back with laughter. And something fluttered in my chest, something that felt dangerous. He looked at me, that smile still on his face, but softer now. "You all right?" I nodded, wiping water from my forehead. "Just drenched." He chuckled again and took a step closer. "I'll grab some towels." He returned with two, tossing one over my shoulders, and kept the other for himself. As I dried off, I caught his eyes on me again. Not staring, but present. Like he wasn't just looking, but taking in who I was. As if something about me surprised him. Or maybe it surprised him that he noticed at all. Later that night, after dinner, I wandered outside while he stayed in the kitchen washing up. The air was cool now, still tinged with the scent of rain. I sat on the porch swing, the wood groaning softly beneath me, and wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders. He came out a few minutes later and didn't say anything, just sat beside me. We didn't speak for a while. The stars were out in full, scattered like salt across a black tablecloth, and the sound of crickets filled the space between us. "You've changed," he said finally. I turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You're not the same girl who used to avoid talking to me when we first met," he said, his voice quiet. "You're something else now." I laughed softly, unsure what to do with the warmth in his words. "I guess I grew up." He turned to me, his eyes shadowed but steady. "Yeah, you did." The silence that followed was different this time. Not just full, it was charged. I could feel it in the air, like the weight before a storm. But it wasn't heavy. It was expectant. He didn't say more. And neither did I. But when I stood to go back inside, his hand briefly touched my back, guiding, protective, lingering just a second too long. And it made my heart beat in a way I hadn't felt before. That night, I dreamed of the ranch, of thunder and rain and quiet touches that left echoes in the dark. And when I woke, I realized I was starting to see him in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. The weather turned warm again after the storm passed, the kind of golden heat that felt sticky and slow. We spent most of the morning working on fence repairs at the far end of the pasture, and by midday, both of us were exhausted. Back at the house, we sat on the shaded porch, a pitcher of iced tea between us, sweat drying on our skin. I stretched my legs out, toes brushing the wood planks, and sighed. "We need a break," I said, leaning my head back. "A real one. No chores. No hay, no fixing things." Mark raised an eyebrow, amused. "What did you have in mind?" "Cards," I said. "Like old school. Poker or something. Winner gets a wish." He smirked at that. "A wish, huh? You know I'm pretty good at poker." "I'll take my chances," I said with a grin, already reaching for the deck we kept in the kitchen drawer. We set up at the table near the screen door, the breeze flicking the edges of the cards as we shuffled and dealt. At first, it was light-hearted, laughs, teasing, and some outrageously bad bluffs on my part. But then he started winning. Again and again. By the time he leaned back and laid down his final hand, a flush, I groaned, dropping mine dramatically. Okay, you win," I said, laughing. "What's your wish?" Mark's smile turned thoughtful. He tapped the table with his fingers, as if considering something carefully. Then he looked up at me, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "I want you to milk Daisy." I blinked. "Seriously? That's your wish?" He shrugged, but his grin was oddly mischievous. "You said anything. Besides, it's part of ranch life." "I've never done it before," I muttered, already getting to my feet. "I'll show you," he said, following me out to the barn. Inside, it was cooler, the air thick with the scent of hay and warm animals. Daisy, the old Jersey cow, stood quietly chewing cud in her stall, barely flicking her tail as we approached. Mark brought over the stool and pail, then gestured for me to sit. "Just like this," he said, kneeling beside me and demonstrating with practiced ease. I watched him closely, trying to memorize the motion. When he handed the task off to me, I hesitated. "Don't be nervous," he said, his voice low. "She's gentle." I took a breath and reached out. The first few tries were clumsy. My hands fumbled, unsure of pressure or rhythm, and I could feel my face heating. Mark was standing just behind me now, watching. I could feel his gaze, not intrusive, exactly, but intent. And it made me feel awkward. "I don't think I'm doing it right," I muttered, not turning around. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice quieter than before. "You just need to relax." But I couldn't. Not with him watching. Not when I could almost feel the heat of his stare on the back of my neck. I focused hard on the task, but the air in the barn had changed, thicker somehow. And when I finally glanced over my shoulder, I caught it. He wasn't just watching. His jaw was tight, and there was a faint flush creeping up his neck, all the way to his ears. He looked away quickly when our eyes met, pretending to adjust the straps on a feed bag, but I had seen it. That flicker of something in his expression. Something like embarrassment. Or guilt. Or something else. The barn felt suddenly too quiet. I stood quickly, brushing hay from my jeans, avoiding his eyes. "I think that's enough for one day." Mark nodded, his voice rough. "Yeah, you did good." We walked back to the house in silence, the kind that felt full of things left unsaid. At the porch steps, he hesitated and then turned to me. "I wasn't trying to make you uncomfortable," he said quietly. I looked at him, trying to read what he meant beneath the words. His face was serious now, the earlier playfulness gone. "It's fine," I said, though my voice didn't quite reach steady. But it wasn't just fine. Something had shifted between us again. Not broken, not crossed, but changed. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the look on his face, or the way my own heart had quickened when I saw it. The sun was high and merciless that afternoon, casting harsh shadows across the dry earth. I'd been curled up on the porch swing with a book when I heard Mark's voice echoing from the barn. "Hey," he called out. "You mind bringing some water?" I set the book down and grabbed 2 bottles from the cooler inside, condensation already forming on the plastic. As I made my way across the yard, I could see him through the open barn doors, shirt damp with sweat, tossing hay bales with a steady rhythm. His back muscles moved under the thin fabric like ropes pulled taut, and I felt a flutter of something unfamiliar pulse through me. I looked away quickly. The air inside the barn was thick with dust and heat. I stepped over the threshold, my foot catching on the uneven wood board at the base of the door. The moment felt slow and fast all at once, my arm swinging out to catch myself, the water bottle slipping from my grip, and then I fell straight into him. He let out a surprised breath as I landed against his chest, and both of us went down in a heap onto the soft pile of hay behind him. The bottles bounced somewhere to the side, forgotten. His hands caught my arms instinctively, holding me steady. His body was warm beneath me, firm, solid, real, and the scent of him was all around me, salt and cedar, dust and sun. For a second, neither of us moved. His eyes were close, too close, and I could see the confusion in them, the flicker of something he wasn't sure how to name. "You okay?" he asked, voice husky. Yeah, I breathed. I didn't see the threshold. "I noticed," he murmured. I realized then just how we were tangled, my knee wedged between his legs, my hands pressed against his chest, his fingers still wrapped lightly around my arms. We both became aware of it at the same time. A breath passed between us, not spoken, felt. I scrambled off him, brushing bits of hay from my shirt, my cheeks burning. "I'm sorry," I said, voice too high, too quick. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," he cut in gently. "Was just surprised, that's all." He sat up slowly, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm, then reached out and handed me one of the bottles. His hand brushed mine as he did, and this time the contact felt intentional. Or maybe it just wasn't avoided. We sat there in silence for a moment, sipping water as the dust settled around us. "I should really pay more attention," I said, forcing a light laugh. He looked at me with a small, unreadable smile. "You've been doing a lot. I think a trip's the least of your worries." But something had shifted in his tone, softer, more careful. Like he wasn't just talking to me as the girl he'd known for years. Something in the way he watched me now had changed. And I felt it. For the rest of the day, he stayed near. Not in a hovering way, but in small, subtle gestures. He'd offer a hand before I asked for it, rest his palm lightly on my back when we passed through doorways, adjust the brim of my cap when it slipped too low over my eyes. His touch had changed. It was no longer just practical. It lingered, even when it shouldn't have. That night, after dinner, I sat on the porch alone. The stars were scattered across the sky again, the air cooler, quieter. I heard the screen door creak behind me and felt his presence before he sat beside me. "You've got hay in your hair," he said quietly. I reached up to brush it away, but his hand moved first. His fingers threaded gently through the strands near my temple, sweeping it back. And he didn't pull away right away. "You really scared me when you fell," he said. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I know." He sat back then, but not far. Just enough to put space between us again. But the moment lingered. It had already happened, and there was no taking it back. And in the stillness of the night, I realized that whatever this was, it wasn't just me anymore. The air turned strange that evening, thick and humid, the kind of stillness that usually comes before a storm. Thunder had rumbled distantly all afternoon, low and lazy, like a warning that never quite arrived. Mark was finishing up outside, closing the barn for the night, while I cleaned up the kitchen. I had just stepped out onto the porch to call him in when it happened. A sharp sting on my stomach, sudden and hot like a spark. I gasped, instinctively clutching my side. It was right above the waistband of my shorts, just under my shirt. Something had bit me, or stung me, I wasn't sure. but it was enough to stop me in my tracks. Mark saw me freeze and hurried over. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern tightening his voice. "Something bit me," I said, wincing as I lifted the edge of my shirt. "Right here." His eyes dropped to where I pointed. "Come inside," he said, already guiding me by the elbow, his grip firm but gentle. We moved to the couch, the air inside still warm from the day. He kneeled in front of me, brows furrowed, and I felt the tremor in my breath as I lifted my shirt higher so he could see. "It's a little red," he murmured, examining the skin just above my hip. "Might have been a wasp or spider. Doesn't look serious, but—" His hand pressed lightly around the area, checking for swelling, for heat. His fingers were calloused, slow and steady. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud and irregular. The barn dust was still in his hair, and I caught the scent of him, salt and sun and the faint sweetness of hay. His closeness made my throat tighten. Then he looked up, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. His hand lingered just under my shirt, the warmth of his palm on my skin like something I didn't want to lose. His gaze was steady, but something deeper shimmered beneath it. Confusion, want, restraint. "Does it still hurt?" he asked, his voice low. I swallowed. "Not really." We stay like that, breath and silence and questions neither of us dared to speak. His hand moved, not away, but gently up my side, just a few inches, and then stopped. A line drawn between hesitation and decision. And then he leaned in. It wasn't fast. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, like he was giving me every second to pull away. But I didn't. When his lips touched mine, it was like the storm outside had finally broken, even though no rain had fallen. His mouth was warm and careful, almost trembling against mine. I felt his hand slide behind my back, steadying me as though I might vanish. I kissed him back. There was no logic in it, no permission, just feeling, just two people caught in something that had been building quietly, patiently, beneath every silence, every glance, every touch that lingered a little too long. When we finally parted, he didn't move far, just enough to look me in the eyes. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have." "I know," I interrupted, breathless. "But neither should I." The words hung there between us, fragile and honest. Outside, the sky cracked with a distant roll of thunder. And inside, everything had changed.